The Polynesian Triangle is like an ancient spearhead thrust across the great Pacific Ocean. Long ago, a voyaging people made this their home. The story of the Polynesians is an epic natural history. Man and nature, each shaping the destiny of the other. At dawn, on the island of Raiatea, in the heart of Polynesia, a young man follows the path of his ancestors towards the summit of their sacred mountain, Temahani. On the ridge top, 5-petaled flowers, shaped like hands, await the first rays of dawn. It is for this treasured bloom that once in his life, every male islander must make this pilgrimage, a gift for his loved one and a link with his past. For all Polynesians, the sunrise points to the future, the sunset to their origins. The sacred mountain of Raiatea is a legendary landmark in the story of Polynesia. When a Polynesian dies, his spirit returns here. But on Raiatea, tradition tells of a more ancient land, far to the west, beyond the setting sun, an island of red birds and natural wealth. The islands of Polynesia are cast across the tropical Pacific like a galaxy of stars. Tahiti and Raiatea are at the very center of this vast island world. To the west, a scattering of low coral atolls, like stepping stones, reach back to the edge of Polynesia, where 2,000 miles from Raiatea lie the islands of Fiji. It is here, in the Western Pacific, that we discover the roots of a unique culture and the origins of a natural history that has spread across the entire ocean. Poised between Asia and Australia to the west, and the open ocean to the east, Fiji is at the very crossroads of the Pacific. For at least 3,000 years, Fiji has been home to a proud people with affinities to both east and west. There are also strong links in both directions in the natural history of these islands. The ancient forests of Fiji resemble those of the islands of Southeast Asia, but they also have much in common with Tahiti and other high islands of Polynesia to the east. But because Fiji is closer to the continents of Asia and Australia, its lush green forests are home to a dazzling array of tropical plants and animals that outshines the forests of Tahiti. The yellow-breasted musk parrot is found only on the largest Fijian island of Viti Levu, but other islands have equally spectacular birds of their own. Collared lories are widespread throughout Fiji. Their local name, kula, means red, but the word also means riches. In times gone by, the feathers of these brilliant little birds were used as currency in trade between the islands. Valued like gold, the kula became a symbol of Fiji's natural wealth. The flowers of the Ndrala tree are the kula's favourite food. The bird's paintbrush tongue is perfectly designed to glean pollen from the slender stamens. Both kula and Ndrala tree have their origins in rainforests more than 2,000 miles to the west. Here, in Fiji, with little competition, they have flourished. The only mammals to have reached Fiji under their own power are bats. Shielding their eyes from sunlight, these flying foxes spend the heat of the day literally hanging out in communal roosts. Bats do not fly willingly over water, but storms have carried 6 species to Fiji. But none of them has naturally colonized the islands further east. Beyond Fiji, the expanse of open ocean is too great. Megapodes are birds named for their big feet. They scratch out pits in the forest floor in which they leave their eggs to incubate. But the coming of people to these islands led to their extinction, except for this species, found on the tiny island of Nuafo'u, just east of Fiji. The native birds were replaced by a newcomer to the forest. The red jungle fowl of Southeast Asia is the most widely domesticated bird on Earth. The first Fijians carried these chickens across the sea to their new home. From here, they were successfully transported to almost every island in the Pacific. Like the pig, the chicken was indispensable to island life. This was a culture of gardeners. With fire, they cleared the forest to create space for their settlements and to cultivate their crops. The mainstay of their economy was the coconut, which yielded food, drink, and fibre for ropes, and required little tending. Of their root crops, by far the most important was the tuber of the yam, a plant they brought from Southeast Asia. Pieces of the tuber were respectfully buried in specially heaped mounds of soil, on which the owner would spit as a gesture of good luck to his treasured crop, and then mark with choral sound. With no further special care, a single tuber can grow to weigh 10 pounds or more. For 3,000 years, the sound of wood against wood has been an essential feature of Fijian village life. Across the Pacific, from New Guinea to Tahiti, the working of tapa cloth was traditionally the preserve of specially skilled women. Tapa comes from the fibrous inner bark of the paper mulberry tree, another native plant of Southeast Asia. Stripped with shell tools, the wet bark was beaten in layers to produce a woven texture of bark cloth. When they came to Fiji, this was their only fabric, for clothing and for household decoration. Fijian bark cloth is renowned for its bold designs. Stencils were cut from palm leaves. Vivid red and black dyes were made from local clays and from the soot of burnt candle nuts. Fijian tapa designs have much in common with the bold tattoo designs of Tahiti and the Marquesas Islands. Here, on the islands of Fiji, at the western rim of Polynesia, we find the origins of an artistic heritage that in time was carried across the entire Pacific. The island of Viti Levu is large enough to generate several substantial rivers. For the hill people, they serve as highways from the mountains to the sea. From the stems of giant bamboo trees, families fashion makeshift rafts called bilibili, on which they voyage downstream to trade their hill crops with other clans living on the coast. The people who first discovered Fiji found that they were blessed with a fertile land on which they could not only cultivate their crops, but also develop their island culture. Fiji became a cultural stepping stone to the far-flung islands of Polynesia. Like all Pacific Islanders, the people of Fiji depend on root crops for their main sustenance. Yam, taro and arrowroot are vital to island life. The diet on tropical islands may not be very varied, but it is wholesome and usually plentiful. Taro is particularly rich in trace elements, including fluoride, which accounts for the tough, white teeth typical of Fijian and most Polynesian people. One fundamental difference which separated Fiji from other societies of Polynesia was their use of cooking pots. Curiously, the skill of making and using earthenware never reached eastern Polynesia. Fijians didn't know about the potter's wheel. For centuries, they made their pots from local clay tempered with sand, which they molded with the help of a large pebble and a wooden paddle. Left to dry for several days, the pots were then fired in an open hearth. The entire process has remained unchanged since the first voyagers came to Fiji some 3,000 years ago. Recent Fijian pottery is plain in style, but archaeological sites on Fiji's southern coast have unearthed many pieces from ancient times which carry intricate designs. The first pottery like this was discovered at a place west of Fiji called Lapita, the name now given to this enigmatic culture which gave rise to the Polynesians. The trail of Lapita pottery snakes its way back in time westward from Fiji through the Coral Sea off New Guinea. From there, a trail of shared language stretches even further to the islands of the South China Sea. During the last ice age, much of this region was dry land. With so much of the world's water locked up as ice, sea levels were 300 feet lower than today. The shallow South China Sea became an archipelago of islands. Islands that were once surrounded by a wide lagoon were raised high and dry above the ocean, their reefs forested with trees. People and wildlife took advantage of the emergence of new islands, like stepping stones across a shallow sea. Eventually, a warm wind began to thaw the frozen wastes of Europe and America, and in its wake came the Great Flood. When the deluge came, coastal tribes all over the world sought higher ground. Like Noah and his ark, some took to their boats in search of land. For people and for wildlife, the rising water launched a new wave of migration. Carried by the wind, the ancestors of the Polynesians voyaged towards a pristine island world that lay towards the rising sun. In time, they reached the shores of Fiji. These large islands had fertile soils, which supported their traditional crops, and there were clays for making their distinctive style of pottery, whose bold designs still gaze down from Fiji's ancient cliffs. The mountainous sand dunes of Singatoka on the south coast of Viti Levu, Fiji's largest island, mark the site of one of their first settlements. The constant pounding of the Pacific shapes and reshapes the dunes, covering, then revealing chapters of Fiji's past. As the wind shifts the sands of Singatoka, fragments of earthenware emerge, which tell of an ancient culture for whom making pottery was a way of life. Here, the sands reveal not just the lapita pottery, but the potters themselves. The young woman who was buried here was of tall Polynesian build and had perfect teeth. For 2,000 years, she has lain in these dunes, facing her ancient homeland to the west. Here on Fiji, the ancestors of the Polynesians fashioned a special way of life, cut off from the mainstream of Asia they had left behind. To Fijians, fire is the symbol of life. To learn the skill of making fire is a lesson in manhood. In Fijian, this technique is called nita. A dry piece of forest hardwood is grooved with a softwood plough. Friction creates heat. With patience, it ignites the tinder of fine shavings. With fire, they fashioned the landscape to cultivate their crops. Fire helped to hollow out the hearts of great trees to create canoes. With the same flames, they fired their pottery and cooked their food. In a world in which metal was unknown and tools were made of stone, fire was a powerful ally. The islands of Fiji are close enough to Southeast Asia to have been enriched by its natural history, but far enough away to have developed their own character. Fiji is home to 20 or so different species of giant millipede. Some are a foot long and an inch thick, among the largest in the world. Compared to distant Tahiti, Fiji has gathered a great range of creatures. But perhaps the most unexpected are its tree frogs. No amphibian has pioneered further east into the Pacific. The secret of these diminutive frogs is in their unusually large eggs. Instead of hatching into tadpoles which need to mature in fresh water, the offspring emerge as fully formed froglets, ready to lead a life on land. Carried on the leaves of storm-swept trees, these robust eggs were able to survive the long sea crossing to Fiji and flourish on these forested islands. An ancient Fijian ritual is the ceremonial drinking of yangona. It is prepared from the dried and pounded roots of kava, a pepper plant that was brought by the first settlers. The tradition spread throughout Polynesia, but nowhere did the ritual become more formalized than in Fiji.
Pon dola bina ko tumod na leo di panua. Madi tere banga na biba kalungat tagari kalau. Mimandu no bina kana leo di panua na sibikoso. Mandu dola bina na lem loloma mana. Diana.
Wrapped in leaves or strips of bark, the crushed roots are mixed with water to release the narcotic power of the kava. The end product is a muddy-coloured liquid which induces mild euphoria and a sense of well-being. For these hill people, the cowrie shell is a symbol of their ancestral links with the ocean. It points towards their chief. Dressed in white tapa cloth, he is the guardian of their heritage. For centuries, this stylized presentation of the sacred Yangona drink has been performed in every Fijian village. Its origins are lost in time, but the spiritual power that surrounds the ceremony is very real. Before the men may share the bowl, the Yangona is presented to the chief in a polished half-coconut shell, which he accepts with traditional respect. The ancient hills of Fiji have been forest covered for at least 30 million years. And in that time, the native wildlife has developed in its own distinctive way. This elegant bird of prey, the Fijian goshawk, is quite distinct from its relatives elsewhere. It is the principal predator of the lowland forests. Throughout the world, colourful members of the parrot family are typical inhabitants of tropical forests. But on Fiji, no less than 5 unique parrot species have evolved, of which the most widespread is the red-breasted musk parrot, which Fijians call kaka, the common Polynesian word for parrot. Even within this group of islands, the parrots have diversified into several local races. The bold blue collar of this individual marks it as a native of Kandavu Island. Endowed with a powerful beak, this handsome parrot makes light work of even the most tough-skinned fruits. More than its parrots, Fiji is famous for its strikingly coloured fruit doves. This spectacular orange dove, called bune, lives only on a handful of Fijian islands. But the richness and diversity of Fiji's fauna is not confined to its bird life. Its forests teem with a jewel-like array of smaller inhabitants. Fiji's shield bugs seem lacquered in vivid metallic paint, in contrast to the disguise of Quasimodo-like stick insects that lumber through Fiji's lush tropical vegetation. Most of Fiji's wildlife has its roots in the forests of Southeast Asia, but here it has evolved in a special Fijian way. Of all Fiji's forest treasures, the silk-tail is the most elusive. Glimpsed in pools of light deep in the forest, its iridescent appearance is like New Guinea's birds of paradise. But this species has no close relatives. Its uniqueness sets it aside as an enigma of Fiji. Fiji, at the crossroads of the Pacific, has developed a nature of its own. For Fiji's hill people, these great forested islands furnished all their needs. Nearing the end of their downstream voyage to trade their produce with fishermen on the coast, these highland villagers must prepare for the long walk home. Having served its purpose, the bamboo raft will be committed to the ocean. With typical Fijian wit, it is known as HMS No Come Back. Beyond the coastline, the great rivers merge with rich ocean currents, creating an underwater world every bit as rich in the variety of its life as the forests of the land. Rich ocean currents make Fiji's reefs among the most colourful and productive in the world. With leaf-shaped tubular nostrils, the ribbon eel, a type of moray, scents for its prey like a dog. Its home is a crevice in the coral, a safe retreat, which it is reluctant to leave. This wriggling spaghetti-like swarm represents the annual reproductive genesis of a sea worm. The adult creatures live in tunnels deep within the fabric of the reef. But on 1 or 2 days each year, each crawls out onto the surface of the coral to shed a section of its tail, filled with its sexual cells. The Fijian name for the worm is bololo, and their annual spawning is an event of such significance that this time of year is known as the bololo season. In the Lau Islands of eastern Fiji, the rising of the bololo is eagerly anticipated. The whole community gathers on the reef to meet the incoming harvest. This is the Fijian equivalent of caviar. Scooped from the sea by the basketful, the wriggling bits of worm are prized as a delicacy. When Polynesians voyaged east to Tahiti, They took with them memories of this annual feast. There are no bololo worms so far out in the Pacific, but Tahitians still call this season by that name. The bololo harvest is just one manifestation of the richness of Fiji's reef life. But the source of that wealth does not originate within Fiji itself. East of Fiji, beyond the chain of Lau Islands, lie the island groups of Tonga and Samoa. They are volcanic islands which have erupted each side of a yawning underwater chasm, at the line where the edge of Asia meets the bed of the deep Pacific. This vast 6-mile deep canyon is called the Tongan Trench. Along its walls, soft corals filter plankton from the currents. Nourished by nutrients that well up from the ocean depths, sea fans and corals thrive in colorful profusion, like window ledge gardens on a towering skyscraper. But this is an unstable world, frequently shaken by earthquakes. Landslips alter the shape of the cliffs and send coral rocks tumbling into the abyss. Far beneath the coral gardens, the bedrock of the ocean is in turmoil. Six miles down, from cracks in the bed of the Pacific, the bowels of the earth burst into the sea. It is from such fiery beginnings that all oceanic islands are born. Lands which in time become a home for wildlife and for people. These people are Samoans. With good justification, they believe they were the first true Polynesians. Here on the fiery edge of the Pacific, their islands became the cradle of a voyaging culture that knew no bounds. Less than 1 million years ago, the Samoan island of Savaii rose from the fiery crucible of the earth to become another speck of land in the vastness of this ocean. As soon as the lava cooled, life came from the sea. Blennies are fish, but can survive in the surf, where they scrape algae from the rocks. The island of Savaii is still in creation. These glistening lava flows are recent additions to the land. For now, the Samoan volcanoes are dormant, quenched by the sea, and life is slowly gaining a foothold on the margins. Beyond the shore, a lava plain stretches to the far horizon. In this harsh landscape, few living creatures can find a home. Yet in the shelter of folds created as the lava cooled, soil has formed, and plants have taken root. From humble beginnings, life grew on Savaii. For the people of this rugged and cyclone-stricken island, hardship has always been a way of life. Though thin and stony, the soil is rich in minerals, and where there is water beneath the ground, crops such as taro will grow. Samoans are perhaps the most industrious and optimistic gardeners in all Polynesia. It takes years of toil and dedication to create a garden from a wilderness of lava rocks. But the Polynesians are renowned for their tenacity. Faced with challenges on land, the Samoans have been dependent on their boats to help them trade across the sea. With few resources to command, craftsmanship became their livelihood. The Samoan artisan and his handcrafted wares became much sought after in the neighbouring islands of Tonga and Fiji. In between lies a scattering of smaller islands which together form the Lau group. It was here that long ago an infant voyaging culture practiced its new ocean-going skills. To sail against the wind was essential for exploration of an ocean. In the Lau and other islands of the West Pacific, a technique of tacking was devised by which the entire mast and sail were moved to the other end of the craft, together with the steering oar. Called shunting, this seemingly clumsy method worked well, but it was essentially a job for two. The sailors of the Lau group, together with neighbouring Tonga, developed a flourishing trade between the Fijian heartland and distant Samoa, a trading triangle linked by the power of wind and sail. The Lau Islands became famous for the quality and beauty of their tapa cloth and for finely worked artifacts crafted from shells of the hawksbill turtle. Such hand-worked goods were in demand in distant Samoa, a group of islands famous for the quality of its own specialist product, finely woven mats used for houses and for ceremonial wear. Hand-plaited from narrow strips of pandanus leaves, each mat might take a month or more to make. Once complete, the mat was decorated, using imported red feathers of Fiji's famous parrot, the kula bird. To ensure supplies, caged birds were plucked for their plumage. The feathers were a clear sign of wealth and social standing. Everywhere in Polynesia, red was not only beautiful, but powerful. The kula bird did not reach the forests of Samoa, so its feathers were traded at great expense from Fiji or Tonga, adding to the wealth of the people who lived on those more naturally endowed islands. The islands of Samoa may not be as bountiful as Fiji, but today's Samoans are proud of their long heritage as the architects and builders of a voyaging culture that linked all the islands at this busy crossroads of the Pacific. craftsmen on Tonga carved the ivory teeth of giant sperm whales. Using stone tools, they fashioned artifacts highly valued throughout all the islands of the Western Pacific. But it was the flowering of sailing technology in all these islands which heralded the great era of Pacific voyaging and marked a confident coming of age for the first Polynesians. For beyond this crossroads of the Pacific, deeper waters and longer voyages beckoned these pioneers to explore even further east, towards the sunrise. Among the sand dunes of Singatoka lie reminders of Polynesia's most distant past. Here in Fiji, a nomadic voyaging people found a home. From this cradle of Polynesia, some of their descendants voyaged across the ocean, carrying treasures from the world they left behind. 2,000 miles to the east, the tiare flower became the fabled bloom of Tahiti and sacred Raiatea. A symbol from the Polynesian past, a gift from one generation to another.
Next Sunday's episode voyages across the open Pacific to discover how people and wildlife found and settled the remote islands of the South Seas. That's next Sunday at 6:10 on BBC Two.